That's just what it says on the button.
Okay.
All right. We are telling the system right here that when you click the button, you are to call main. And main is the function that we just wrote. This is not the only way of doing this. You're going to learn other ways of doing it also. All right. Eventually, what we're going to do is we're going to create an HTML form. All right. And for instance, we'd have a form, you know how to make a form, that would say first name. It would have a label first name, then a text box first name. Then it would have a label for last name and a text box for last name. One for hours worked, hourly rate, and gross pay. And it'll have two buttons in there, like a calculate and a clear button. And you're going to put that stuff in, and if you put in non-numeric values, or you put in values that are out of range for hours worked or hourly rate, you won't accept them. That's what we're going to get to. All right, not yet. It'll be a while until we get there. All right. So if you would please, if you haven't saved that, save it, and then bring up your test01.html and the payroll iteration 01, which looks pretty much like what we started with before. Okay, so bring up the test01.html, which should look like this, and bring up the payroll iteration 01. And let's look at what's different on here. Well, I didn't do a very good job of copying my stuff over, so, but this is going to have a lot of, it's going to have basically, this is what's different. You may or may not have realized this, but if you run your program, the one you just created, if you run that program 20 times, every single time it has the exact same results. Would you agree with that? Why is that? Well, you're all right, because we didn't change anything, because we hard-coded in the values. All right? That doesn't make the program very, it makes it very easy to use, but it doesn't make it very portable for, if I want to do it and have other people work with it. All right? Well, what I can do is I can come in here, and you can do this too if you want to. From my last program, I can grab all those variables. All right? I can grab everything that I put here, and we're going to make some changes, so don't worry about it. In fact, I'm going to just grab the whole flipping thing here. I'm going to grab all of it, and I'm going to paste it into part one. Then we'll start ripping it apart. Okay? So the first thing is, I don't want there to be a first name. I don't want there to be a last name. I want hours worked to be 0. I want hourly rate to be 0. That's the first thing we want to do, is just declare those variables and give them those values. Anybody know what this is called right here? Colin, you might. Do you know what that's called? What? I didn't hear what you said. Well, but this literally, when you put double quote, or single quote, it's called the empty string. It's a string with nothing in it. So we are initializing first name and last name to the empty string. All right? We are assigning hours worked, hourly rate, and gross pay to 0. All right? Notice that if I did run this, I could. I don't know why I'd want to do this, but I could save it the way it is, and I could run it. Not that one. So there we go. I could run it. Doesn't show me very much, but it works. All right? So let's change that, because even though it works, it's pretty stupid. It's not a very helpful program. All right? So what do we want to start doing? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to set values for first name, last name, hours worked, and hourly rate. Would you agree with that? It's the first thing that we want to do. All right, so we're going to add, the rest of this stuff can all stay the way it is. But in here, I'm going to put a comment in that says prompt for variable values, because that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to say first name. I'll just put the first one in right here so you can see what it says. In fact, we'll put the first two in because they're almost exactly the same. Okay, so I'll let you put that in, and then we'll talk about what it means. This means new line. That's as though you hit the enter key. It's literally referred to as a carriage return line feed, CRLF. All right, so what's new here are these two lines. This is calling a built-in JavaScript function that's called prompt. The idea of it is it's going to prompt you, okay? So it's going to give you a message here that says enter first name. And then it's going to have a box where you can enter the first name. That makes sense? What you put after the comma, this is optional right here. This is going to be the default value. So if I put Jeff and Scott here, then the default first name would be Jeff, the default last name would be Scott. That make sense? You don't have to put in a default value. You don't have to. All right, but I put it in there. So what you'll notice, if you take a look right now, I'm going to save this. I guess I have saved it. And then when I go back and run this now when I click it, notice, enter first name. That's the message that we told to put in there, enter first name. That value that's there that says first name, that's what goes in the box. So if I run it now, I can put in a different value. Bob, now I get last name. Jones. I still don't have my code in there to actually, I have not prompted yet for hours worked and hourly rates, so there's 0. Does that make sense? All right. But I can run it again by refreshing my browser, and now I can put in 2 different names. Greg, Bailey. And you see I've got that. Now, hopefully what you can see from this is that it's easier, and the program, I shouldn't say easier isn't the right word. The program is now, it's a better program because now we're able to give, allow the user to enter in whatever she or he wants to enter in for inputs. Okay? Now, I don't want you to type this, but I want you to see something. Okay? What if I did this? I'm going to grab these 2 lines. Don't type this in, please. And I'm going to paste them in, and I'm going to say here, hours worked, and I'm going to come here and I'm going to say hourly rate. All right, and I'm going to say here, enter hours worked. Again, I don't want you to type this in. We have to make changes to it for it to work correctly. And I'll just put here hours and enter hourly rate, and I'm going to say here rate. All right, I'm going to save this, come back and run it. And first name Jeff, last name Scott, hours worked 40, hourly rate 25, and it worked. All right. It worked because JavaScript is basically smart enough to know that even though what I put in here, technically what I put in that value there and that value there, they weren't numbers. They were strings. But it was smart enough to say, well, they're numeric values. So what if I run this again? All right. Notice it took the values, but when it tried to multiply them, it gave me NaN, not a number. All right. So technically, even though it worked the way that we wrote it, even though it worked, that's not the way that you're supposed to do it. All right. This is calling a built-in JavaScript function named prompt. But what we want to do is we want to take whatever value you put in there and convert that to a number. Does that make sense to people? When you take a value that you put into a text box, basically, which is what this is, and you convert it into a number, It's called parsing it. That's the technical term that's used. And this kind of goes back to the question, Colin, that you asked before. When you parse a value, you can tell it you want it to parse it into an int, which means just a whole number, or you can tell it to parse it into a float, which is a number that can have a decimal place. Well, this could have a decimal place. So I want to change this so this says parse float, and then I've got it, I got to spell float right. Again, I've got to spell float right. There we go. And I've got to put in this. All right. So please put in that. And save it, run it, and see if it works. And if it doesn't, don't even worry about raising your hand because there's something I have to show you about this. This may not sound that important to you, but I want you to understand something, and that is you're already doing fairly complex JavaScript because you are calling a function within a function. It's calling this function right here, this prompt, it's calling that function right there. And it's telling it then to use the parse float on the output of that function. So the output of our prompt function becomes the input to our parse float function. So let's see, I saved it now. Let's go back and run it and see if it works. And it looks fine. Now you'll notice it looks funky. Hours worked 40.5 when I put in 40.50. If I wanted all of these right here, if I wanted both of these to be 2 decimal places, what do I have to do? What did I do to this one that I didn't do to these two that do use the 2 fixed? JavaScript does not, to my knowledge, have a built-in thing for currency, so you have to manually add the $sign if you want that. All right, I don't care about that right now, but as Evan just mentioned, and he's right, I'd want to come back in here and do this. All right, so I've added the 2 fixed to both the hours worked and the hourly rate. So now you'll notice that if I run this and I put in, as an example, I'll just leave the first name and the last name, but 21.875 and 22.123. Now it took both of them and it made them both 2 decimal places. All right. And again, as we go over this, if you go, it doesn't really make a hell of a lot of sense what you're doing. That is to be expected. All right. Tell you this real quick. I'm sure it's one of those TMI types of things you don't give a damn, but I'm just going to tell you anyway. I mentioned to you that when I was a junior, I took beginning Spanish. Well, what I didn't realize, or it didn't register in my head, is when you're a junior in high school, juniors and seniors are upperclassmen. Okay, they're considered upperclassmen, whereas freshmen and sophomores are underclassmen. So with the high school I went to, they rewarded upperclassmen. We got to start class a day later than everybody else. Does that make sense? Well, I didn't realize that these other people, these underclassmen who were in the class with me, they'd all had 1 day of Spanish. So they learned about 20 or 30 words, and they were talking back and forth to one another. And I thought, what the hell? I'm in a frickin' beginning class, and these people know the language already. All right. So I thought, I'm never going to get this. And maybe I've told you this. I'll always remember this. The first time I ever had to do a program, an actual computer program in a class that I was given, I didn't even know what the hell the guy was talking about. People were walking out of the classroom, this isn't going to be hard. He was talking about arrays and prime numbers and I don't know what else. I'd never even heard of this stuff. I think I kind of remember, isn't a prime number, isn't it something that, I don't know, it only goes into itself in one? I thought that's what it was, but I wasn't even sure. An array, I don't know what the hell that is. So I went to the library. We didn't have Google. We didn't have an internet. We had a card catalog. And I found a math book that explained those terms, and I sat and read it. Was my program good? It worked. Got better over time. All right. But that's to be expected. So again, we're telling it in here to do the prompt for the hours. Whatever results that we get, try to parse them into a float. Maybe you tried running this, maybe you didn't. But just to see this, what if I try running it? I'll leave it first name and I'll leave it last name. What if I left that blank? And what if I left that blank? What's it going to give me? NaN. Even if I have a number for one of these, if one of these is numeric and one is non-numeric, when you try to multiply a number by an NaN, you get NaN. You may have noticed that already. So how do you make sure you don't get that? We're going to get to that in just a bit. All right? But we haven't really, this is almost the same program as the last one was. The only difference is now we are asking the user to input information for us. So if we look at it, this was the first one. We took all of this, we changed what we were initializing the variables to, but the only thing that's new in here is this. Does that make sense? All right. And like I said, if you say, well, it sort of makes sense, but I'm still not exactly sure as to what the hell we're doing, that is to be expected. It really and truly is. All right. All right. As we go on, maybe you noticed this, maybe you didn't. Okay. Let's suppose that the place we work for, if you work overtime, which is over 40 hours a week, you get time and a half. Right now you don't. Does that make sense? But we're going to assume that you get time and a half. So let's go in and let's grab everything that we had in payroll iteration 1. So let's grab all of this stuff, everything in between our curly braces, copy it to the clipboard, and then let's bring up payroll iteration 2. All right, now we're going to go and add some logic into this. So the first thing I'm going to do is just paste all that in. Boom, I've got all that. So right now, this program in the inside, it looks exactly the same. It looks exactly the same as the one we previously did. Does that make sense? All right. Well, let's see. We've got first name. We've got last name. We've got hours worked. We've got hourly rate. Yeah, that's all good. All right. We've got gross pay. That's good. Let's go in and add a couple more things. All right. So let's go in. First, let's go in here and let's add another variable. I'm going to call this OT hours. And I'm going to set that also equal to 0. Whoops. That's the first thing. All right. And I'm going to do two more things. I'm going to basically create something that I'm going to call max non-OT. So in the scenario I just gave you, the most hours I can work without getting overtime is 40. Does that make sense? And a lot of places that's what it is. But there's nothing to say that in the future somebody couldn't change it from 40 to 35 or from 40 to 45, right? It would be possible to do that. Also, we're going to set the overtime rate at time and a half. But when we run this program, we don't want our maximum hours of non-overtime to change. We want them to always be 40. We want our overtime rate to always be 1.5. Does that make sense? So those values are considered, they're what are called constants. All right? So I'm going to come right back up, and right before I've got my variable declarations here, I'm going to hit enter a couple times, and I'm going to put up here constant declarations. And I'm going to put in here const, and I'm going to say max non-OT, and I'm going to set that equal to 40. And I'm going to have another one that's called const OT rate, and I'm going to set that equal to 1.5. All right. First of all, somebody tell me, there's two big changes here between this and what's below it. What are the changes? Come on. Const. You use const instead of var. That's the first one. Second one, it's convention in programming languages. You don't have to do it, but it's convention in programming languages to make your constants uppercase, all uppercase. That should send a subliminal signal to the person running the program. That's a constant value. It cannot change. All right? Now, I'm going to tell you something that's kind of bad about JavaScript versus other languages. Everybody hear what I said? JavaScript allows you to change constants. It's the only language I know of that does. But not all browser versions allow you to do that. All right? So there are some books that tell you don't even use const, just make them vars, because JavaScript is all effed up anyway. It's not. It's something that will eventually, as they go on, it will be fixed. All right? So we're saying here that we want these two things. We want a maximum number. So I'm even going to put comments here. Max number of non-OT hours one can work. All right, and this simply will just say overtime rate. Okay? Now, hopefully you understand. Let's suppose that this place that we're doing this payroll application for, let's assume that it's a union shop. Okay? And they've got a strong union. They don't have many strong unions around in this world anymore, but let's suppose that it is. All right? And let's suppose that someplace in here, in our program, someplace in there, we end up using this OT rate all over the place. Are you with me? So we're using it all over the place. But now the people in the union have negotiated, I don't want you to change yours, but they've all negotiated, so now you get double time instead of time and a half. The reason you put a constant in there like that is I only have to change it there, then recompile the program, and every place I use it down below, it's now 2 instead of 1.5. So you use constants for two reasons. First of all, it makes your program a little bit more readable. Okay? And second of all, you only have to change the value of constants in one place. Now, I don't want to take first name or last name or hours worked or hourly rate or gross pay or OT hours. I don't want any of these to be constants. Does that make sense to everyone? I don't want that. All right? Also, can you tell me? So let's suppose, okay, I put in here Jeff. I put in here Scott. I put in here 50. I put in here 10. All right? And I'm not going to worry about this right now, but I put in here, what is that? How many overtime hours did I work? How do you know that? Okay. So really what I worked was, my OT hours are my hours worked minus what? No, minus what? That. Max. Non-OT. Does that make sense? You don't want to use hard-coded values. You want to use constants. And the name of the constant, that's the reason for declaring a constant. All right? So now hours worked minus max non-OT. Again, if it changes, so in the future, that becomes 35, I recompile the program, boom. And it's now I've worked 15 hours. I don't have to worry about changing that manually to 40. All right? All right, that's all fine and dandy, but how do we do that? All right, we've read in our values right here. I think all of you would agree. Okay? So between where I've read in my last value and where I figure out the gross pay, what you may or may not realize is there's two ways I can figure out gross pay now. You got straight time, which means you work no overtime, or you get time and a half for your overtime. So I'm going to put a comment in here that says, check if employee worked more than 40 hours. In other words, more than max non-OT. All right? So, if hours worked greater than max non-OT. In English, it's what you said before. What you're saying is if the hours that you worked were greater than 40. That's what you're saying. All right, so if that's the case, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to put a comment there that says employee has OT pay coming. We don't know how much yet. We don't have any idea. All right? Because we have to figure out what their overtime hours are. So, we already know. In fact, let's why don't we come in here, since we have this thing here called OT hours, let's make another variable here, and let's call it reg hours. I mean, this is I did it with a little bit of overkill. You didn't really have to type in reg hours and OT hours, but let's do it anyway, because I really want you to understand what's going on here. So please make sure that you put both of these. These were our two new variables. So we had two constants, which we haven't had before, and we had two new variables. Okay? We're not going to prompt for those new variables. We're going to figure those out right here. So if they worked greater than 40 hours, their regular hours, what are the regular hours equal to? What is that? What value? 0. No. What? No. Their regular hours, we know that the hours that they worked were more than 40, correct? So their regular hours are 40. All right? And what are their overtime hours? What are those? What do I put here? What do I type in right there? What's that? Hours worked minus what? Minus max non-OT. Again, play computer. So if I put in here for hours worked, if I put a 50 in there, all right, then the regular hours are 40 and the overtime are the hours worked, which we put in 50 minus that 40. So in other words, 10. That's my overtime hours. Does that make sense? This is the way payroll programs are actually written. Now, we didn't have to do that. I did it because I figured it would make a little bit of sense to do it that way. Again, you may or may not agree. All right? So, now it's time to figure out what their gross pay is. So, calculate gross pay. So, their gross pay, well, we know what, and I'm going to probably over parenthesize here, but we know their regular hours, which is max non-OT, all right? So their regular hours, we want to multiply that by the hourly rate. That's part of it. That's not the entire equation. We want to add something to that. I'm going to ask you that in just a minute. So again, play computer. We came in right here. For hours worked, we put in 50. For hourly rate, we put in 10. Everybody cool with that? Does that make sense? All right. So we come down to here. Is hours worked, which was 50, greater than max non-OT, which is 40? Well, you all know that. I'm not going to ask you. You all know, yes, 50 is greater than 40. So regular hours equal max non-OT, so we're setting that equal to 40. And our overtime hours is the hours worked, which was 50, minus max non-OT, which is 40, so the overtime hours is 10. Does that make sense to everybody here? I'm asking, does that make sense? All right. So this is going to calculate our regular pay, which was 40 times 10. It's not going to calculate our overtime, but it's going to calculate our regular pay. Does that make sense? So we have to account for it down here is everything else. How do I do that?
OT hours.
Okay. OT hours. Oops. Times what?
Did you say it was 2 that we were doing double time?
No, that's time and a half.
Oh, okay.
That's the OT rate. But if I just put that in here, if I type this, then I'm going to take whatever hours they work times 1.5. It's like they're making $1.50 an hour for that. I don't think they're going to like that. So what I want to put in here is what? I want to put in their regular hourly rate times 1.5. And again, play computer. The OT hours we just said were 10. The hourly rate up there we said was 10. The OT rate is 1.5. So for their straight pay right here, they're going to make $400. But this will be 10 times 10 times 1.5, which is $150, which means that they made $50 worth of overtime. Because at their 10 hours that they worked of overtime, instead of making $10 an hour, they got 1.5 times that, which is $15 an hour. 10 times 15 is 150. All right? Hopefully that at least makes some sense to you. All right? And again, like I said, look at it this way. You are learning a new language. And it's funny, I don't think it was any of you, but I know I had a person come in here last summer, and I don't think he ended up signing up for the program. In fact, I think he went the hardware route. But he asked me, he said, do we have to know math? Well, this is about as much math as you have to know. All right? All right. So, then I use the word down here that says else. And the good news is you already know what goes in there. And that's this. Because if the if is true, the employee has overtime coming. Otherwise, employee has no OT pay coming. So that's it.
You need a closing, another closing parentheses.
Right here, I've got one here and one there. And I got one here and one there.
Oh, are we not supposed to put that second thing in?
You can do that too if you want to. Colin's question was, should we take this second thing in here and put this into its own set of parentheses too? And you certainly can. It doesn't help the program run any better, but a lot of times it aids in your understanding of it. And if it does, that's important too. So you saw this, and I want to show you this. Even if you're still typing, just stop for a second. I'm going to run the last copy. This is the old one that we had. So I'm going to run iteration 1 right there. So run. Notice if I don't care about the names, but if I put in 40 and I put in 10, everything's fine. If I run it again and I put in 50 and I put in 10, it's 500 because there is no overtime. All right? But now, if I come in and I run it this is the second version now, it's test 2, and I run it, and I put in for my first name, I put in my last name, and I put in 50, and I put in 10. Now, something it doesn't like, so let's go back and check. One nice thing about working with Notepad++, you sort of asked this before, but notice if I highlight the first one, it shows me the one that goes with it. See that? I like that. Because I typically forget to put in one or more of these. I'm looking to see if I've forgotten anything. No. No. See, one thing I can do, just so you all see this, I can grab all of this, I can grab my entire program, top to bottom, copy it to the clipboard, okay? Then I can go back to my HTML file, and I showed you this before. I can hit F12, come on, why is that? That's not what it's supposed to be doing here. Fine. Why I'd have to do this, I don't know. There it is. I can come over to my console and I can paste that whole flippin' program in there and hit enter. And somewhere it'll come in if I have an error in here, and it'll show me where my errors are. Now we're going to learn better ways of doing it than I just showed you. All right, we're going to have a whole chapter on debugging, but I'm just trying to show you some simple debugging. And just like you, I've got to start looking through here now. What's that?
Does gross pay need an equal sign?
What's that?
Gross pay need an equal sign?
Thank you. See that? Colin just said, what's missing there? An equal sign. See that? So just putting in that equal sign, let's see if that fixes it. So I've again got to go to test 2. All right. Oh, that looks better. So thank you. So again, Jeff, Scott, 50 now and 10. And notice I have my $50 of overtime. So going back to that, in case you didn't get that, on here, I forgot to put the equal sign after gross pay. All right? So again, I'm not saying to you, hey, does that totally 100% just totally make sense to you? Because it might not. All right? But you're starting to write this stuff. All right? And that's what's important. Has everybody gotten theirs to work? No. All right. How many did not get theirs to work? Well, then let's stop. Stop this. If you make a mistake in here, so if I, instead of saying right here, instead of saying if hours worked, if I change this to hour worked, and I save it and run it again, all right? Says first name, last name, well, and I got nothing, all right? What happens is JavaScript is very unique like this. JavaScript is like this. There's a couple other languages. PHP is another one that's like this, in that what it will do is it literally creates a brand new variable that's called hour worked instead of hours worked. Did you hear that? So it creates a brand new variable, and since we didn't give it a value, what did I say before? When you declare a variable and don't give it a value, what's its value? Undefined. So it's trying to see if undefined is greater than 40. And it has no idea, no comprehension on how to do that. So it's breaking down right there. Does that make sense? I think you probably need a break. Let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back. We'll do one more of these, and it's not going to be a lot that we have to add in. But we're going to do one more, and then that'll put us around 10:45 or so. And then you'll have the rest of the period to work on your homework. So let's take a break. Let's come back at about 10:10 or 10:11, please.